This is video log number 1 in preparation for Cuba. I'm in the process of reading some of the articles that were signed in preparation for our trip. This one is really just an article about the facts of Cuba. It's from the Science Kids website. And most of the things on this article are things that I knew. But a few of them were interesting to me. I didn't know that people referred to Cuba as El Cocodrilo because it looks like a crocodile from above. I had no idea that there were 11 million people. That seems like a lot to me. I think I thought it was much smaller than that. It also says here that Cuba is renowned for its music and that bands play everywhere in the capital city of Havana. I didn't know that. When I go to the Dominican Republic, when I went to the Dominican Republic, I think I've been 3 times. That was kind of a common part of their culture, that music was just everywhere. And so it makes sense to me that kind of in that Caribbean area that it would be similar. It's the same thing with the sugar cane. The Dominican Republic, there was sugar cane just everywhere. And the people that I was friends with there were people that worked in the sugarcane fields, and so it made sense to me that that was one of the main crops grown in Cuba, but I just didn't expect Cuba to be renowned for its music. It says that by far the most popular sport is baseball. I feel like we know that. I feel like that is Cuban baseball players are kind of a big thing. And it also says that the game of dominoes is extremely popular. A year ago, I was in Florida, and I was in Little Havana in Miami, and there were whole parks, just whole sections of Little Havana that were just filled with teeny tiny tables where cute little old men would sit around and play dominoes for hours. I also got to taste my first Cuban coffee when I was in Little Havana, and it is some strong stuff. But I'm excited to go to Havana, especially. I guess I'm excited for all of it, but I'm just excited to see the people playing dominoes, and I'm excited to experience the music, and yeah, I'm excited to go to El Cocodrilo. On the weekly chart about religion in the Catholic Church in Cuba by Elizabeth Gonzalez. Interesting fact that 44% of the population claims to not be religious, but 70% and 80% respectively really like the Catholic Church and Pope Francis. I feel like that's kind of different than where we are, because I know a lot of people who do not like the Catholic Church but do like Pope Francis, but these Cubans tend to generally have a positive view of both of them. There's a little graph here about the primary religions that are practiced in Cuba. 27% is Catholic, but it says that 5% is evangelical and 2% is Protestant. So I don't quite understand that distinction. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to kind of delve into that a little bit more. But it is interesting that in 1998, I believe is what it said, Fidel Castro removed the ban on Christmas. There was a ban on Christmas. I already have such immense respect for the women pastors that we're going to be meeting there. And this article just boosted my respect for any people of religious affiliation in Cuba even more. Number 3, I just finished reading the World Atlas article about religious beliefs in Cuba, and this article makes a distinction between Protestants, like Baptists, and Pentecostals. So I wonder if, when the earlier article talked about 5% evangelical and 2% Protestant, I wonder if that's what it meant, if Baptists were in the 2% as opposed to Pentecostals. I could still be wrong about that. But I just finished reading, journal entry number 4. I just finished reading about the major ethnic groups in Cuba. I had no idea that only 9.3% of the total population was Black. I thought that there would be much more than that. I was disappointed to read about the racism. It's funny because the very last paragraph of this article talks about how even with the slave trade and brutal dictatorship, they've overcome the challenges and soldier ahead as one people, and yet earlier in the article it talks about how the white people they constitute the upper class elites, and the country is racially divided, and that like black people have to settle for meager salaries, and they don't get the higher up governmental positions. I guess that's just, I guess it just makes me think that, sin is everywhere. I just finished reading the World Atlas article about the culture of Cuba. It talks about everything from kind of social beliefs and customs to religion to music to art to clothing to cuisine. Some of this, like stuff about religion and even the stuff about the music, are things that we had talked about in previous articles. But there were some interesting things that I didn't know, like with regard to the social beliefs and customs. I didn't know that the revolution promoted the education and financial independence of women in Cuba, and it allowed them to attain thriving careers in agriculture and industry and service-related occupations. By 1990, the ratio of men to women in the country's head services was nearly equal. They provided state-run, was it state-run or state-funded? State-run daycare centers so that women could work and also have a place to keep their kids. They looked down, the people's power looked down, tried really hard to not let women be oppressed at home by their men, by their husbands or their families. That seems pretty cool to me. I'm not sure, sometimes you read something like this in an article, and especially being a complete novice and you don't know any of it yet, sometimes you wait until you hear, oh, there's kind of another side to it. Oh, it's not quite as utopian as it seems, or oh, it's not quite as great as it seems. But that in itself just seems pretty incredible. And I'm kind of wondering, trying to remember all the things I know about the Communist Party. It's not about individualism. It's about the group as a whole, and it's about what you are all comrades, right? You all work together for the good of the state. And you need every single person on board. So it makes sense that when you need every single person on board, man versus woman wouldn't be a thing. It would be, whoever we need. We need everybody. We need anybody who's willing to do it. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know a whole lot about communism yet, although I'm planning on learning before we go on this trip. I didn't know that Santeria was mostly associated with black people in Cuba, and so there's a lot of racism. I knew that people who practice Santeria, based on the book that Marcy and I did our presentation on, I knew that people who practice Santeria kind of skirted to the background a little. It was wasn't really totally secretive, as in like a secret society, but it really was kind of hush-hush, and you just kind of kept it on the DL. But I didn't realize the connection between that and racism, is that people really look down on you if they associate Santeria with this particular race of people, and so it was kind of a double whammy. I didn't know that. It talks about the photograph of Che Guevara, which is one of the most widely recognized images in the world, and yeah, that's true. I can picture it when I say it. So that's pretty cool. Oh, there was something here. There was something in this. Oh, it talks about how street art is very popular in Cuba. That's another thing that I remember from my trip last year to Little Havana. Was we took a tour of Little Havana, and one of the things we toured was all of the street art that's in Little Havana, because there's so much of it, because it is so common. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see this. I'm excited to see it all in Cuba. I'm excited to kind of see the similarities and the differences. And, it talks about the dress. And I remember so many of the men that I saw wearing the, what's it called? The Gayabera style of clothing. I remember exactly what that is. I can picture it. So yeah, this was a neat article. I am reading the World Atlas article about the languages that are spoken in Cuba, and I realize how homogenous I just thought Cuba was. I just thought they all spoke Spanish. And I also thought Spanish is just a general word instead of Cuban Spanish as opposed to um, Galician and Corsican. Um, I think it's interesting that the Santeria, that the Yoruba religion actually has its own liturgical language. I don't know why. I assumed that Christianity was the only one that had that. Do we have, Latin that the Catholic Church uses a lot, as do some of the rest of us? Excuse me, but I thought it was pretty cool that I think it's called Lukumi. The Lukumi language is spoken by the practitioners of Santeria just for the purposes of liturgy. I also think it's interesting that those who spoke Haitian Creole were discriminated against until Fidel Castro came to power. Here in America, we think about Fidel Castro as if he is just this horrible person who did horrible things. And maybe in some ways, yeah, I'm sure that's true. But also, there were some benefits to this. For example, the empowerment of women that we talked about just a little while ago, or the, the breakdown of discrimination between those who spoke Haitian Creole, the native Haitian Creole speakers, and the Cuban Spanish speakers. So much so that now it says that a whole lot more Cubans speak Haitian Creole, and a lot of them even speak it fluently, like even non-Haitian Cubans. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. Okay, I just read the Pulitzer Center article called "We Are Not Hidden: Race in Cuba," and how in 1959 Fidel Castro said that he had eradicated systemic racism from the island, and kind of focused on this one Cuban identity. It's funny because as I've been telling you, I've been reading about this, and it seems like, oh wow, like he got rid of discrimination. He treated all these people as equal. That's fantastic. Well, here's that other side that I wondered about. What he did was not say, bring your unique culture to this table and all cultures are welcome. He said, no, no, no. We will create one culture, and you leave anything that is not this behind. So you're losing a part of your identity. It's not, it's not that those other things must be ignored. Like, rephrase. This makes me think of a time when I was in seminary the first time, and issues of race relations were coming up between white students on campus and black students on campus. And so we were doing a lot of kind of reconciliation events and reconciliation programs to just talk through some of these hard discussion points. And one of the things that somebody had mentioned is that in Christ we're all one body. Like, these other identities are secondary to our first identity in Christ. Or I think somebody else around the same time said, well, I don't even see race. I don't even see it. I just see us as this other thing. And I remember one of the girls who was leading it, she was black, and she said, if you say you don't see race, then you don't see me, because being black is part of my identity and it's part of who I am. And even though being a Christian is also part of my identity, there's a difference in being a black Christian and being a white Christian. And if you don't see my skin color, you don't really see me. And that's what this article makes me think of when he says we're eradicating racism, we're just creating this one Cuban identity, and as a result, they've lost or kind of sublimated or at least made things go underground. This huge, great, rich history, the various cultures, the various languages, the various religions. Kind of sad. Seeking for unity. There's a difference in unity and uniformity. I don't think Castro and the Cuban government in this time was seeking seeking unity. I think they were seeking uniformity. And I relate this a lot to the church, because as the church, we're called to be one body, right? That's what we're striving to be. Even though we have different denominations, even though we have different theologies, sometimes the goal is, like Jesus said in John 17, that they would be one as I and the Father are one. John 16, John 7, I think it's John 17. So we go after this concept of unity, but sometimes we mistake unity with uniformity. Unity should mean even in our differences, we can still come together. We find a common unifier, but that doesn't mean that we leave our differences behind. Whereas uniformity is no. We all look the same. We absolutely leave our differences behind. So Castro, it seems like in this case the revolution cloaked it in the language of unity, but it was actually uniformity. I just finished the article on race relations, Fidel Castro's legacy in Cuba on race relations. That was the NPR article, transcripted an interview with Mark Sawyer. It's interesting that depending on your race, you have very different views on Castro and whether he was great or whether he was not great. And Sawyer said so much of the economy now, it's a market-based economy, but it's also dependent on remittances, which is something that we've read about in other parts of our reading. But that most of the people who left Cuba and went to America were white. So when a huge part of your economy is based on remittances, you got to realize that's coming from white people to white people. So now that things are changing and the economy is turning more market-based, it's allowing for more discrimination, and it's becoming unequal again. But he did say that Fidel got, what was that quote? He got as close as anybody has ever come to eliminating racial inequality in a place that had plantation slavery. Had plantation slavery. So even that's pretty cool.